Hello, everyone, and welcome to Champions of Innocence. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kayla Mueller, and I'm the president of the Nebraska Regional Advisory Council for the Midwest Innocence Project. We are proud to host this annual event and to support the Midwest Innocence Project in its mission to educate about, advocate for, and obtain and support the exoneration and release of wrongfully convicted people in the Midwest. There are an estimated 2,000 to 7,000 people wrongfully incarcerated in the 5 states served by the Midwest Innocence Project, which includes Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. MIP is fighting to bring home innocent Nebraskans and has more than 45 cases spanning 14 counties on a waiting list. However, current laws in Nebraska make it extraordinarily difficult to obtain the records and police reports that are essential to their investigation and litigation process. And so these individuals continue to wait for justice. You're going to hear a lot about the Beatrice Six Case today. In 2009, they became the first 6 people exonerated by DNA evidence in Nebraska, and they represent one of only a few cases in the state that have resulted in exoneration. This only tells us that there are likely still many individuals incarcerated in Nebraska for crimes they didn't commit. This year's Champions of Innocence event is especially important because it also coincides with International Wrongful Conviction Day on October 2nd, the theme for which is "The Fight Continues." Today, you will hear how those who have been wrongfully convicted have fought for years, often decades, to be exonerated. How the fight continues after exoneration to recover compensation for years lost in prison and to hold those at fault accountable. How we must continue to fight to change laws in Nebraska and elsewhere to prevent wrongful convictions and eliminate procedural barriers that are keeping innocent people in prison. And how one exoneree uses his voice on behalf of those still fighting for their freedom. Whether you are a longtime supporter of the Midwest Innocence Project or learning about the organization for the first time today, thank you for giving your time and attention to this important cause. We'd also like to thank our sponsors for today's event, ACLU of Nebraska, Baird Home Law Firm, Berry Law Firm, and the University of Nebraska College of Law. The Midwest Innocence Project cannot continue to fight for justice without this support and the support of people like you. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Midwest Innocence Project, Tricia Rojo Bushnell.
Hello, and thank you all so much for joining us today on International Wrongful Conviction Day. International Wrongful Conviction Day is a day to raise awareness of the causes and remedies of wrongful convictions and to recognize the tremendous personal, social, and emotional costs of wrongful convictions for innocent people and their families. Wrongful Conviction Day began as an effort of the Innocence Network, which is an affiliation of 69 innocence organizations in the United States and around the world who work to provide pro bono legal and investigative services to the wrongfully convicted, to redress the causes of wrongful convictions, and to support the exonerated after they are freed. This is the 8th annual day that the Midwest Innocence Project has participated in. And we can think of no better way to celebrate this important, informative day than focusing on the issues that people face right here in Nebraska. Well, many have heard of innocent people having their convictions overturned in Nebraska, with stories, for example, like the Beatrice Six. Not everyone is familiar with the extreme difficulties innocent people face in overcoming their convictions in this state, particularly where there is no DNA evidence. Take, for example, the case of our client Antoine Young, who still waits for justice, even though we started the legal process for him 7 years ago in 2014. In that process, we have presented evidence of the actual perpetrator who took the stand in 2016 and pleaded the Fifth Amendment to every single question that we asked, including whether or not he had committed the crime. That real perpetrator was the first person police suspected of committing the crime, and not Antoine, who only became a suspect when a known informant, an unreliable eyewitness, named Antoine and then tried to extort money from his family in exchange for changing his testimony. We presented all of that evidence of Antoine's innocence and the true perpetrator's guilt, as well as mountains of evidence of the ineffective assistance of trial counsel that Antoine had received. All of this at a court hearing back in 2018. Yet it took 3 years for the court to make its ruling and to deny Antoine's motion, knowing that in that time, in those 3 years, nothing could happen, that Antoine would still be waiting for justice, for a day in which a court would hear his claims. And these are the stories of the system in Nebraska, a system that has yet to adopt the practice of letting individuals overcome rules, procedural rules, and get into court if they can prove that they are innocent. One of the things that many people don't know is currently in the US federal system, innocence itself is not a claim to get out of prison. Instead, innocence is a reason to get into court, where you can then raise other constitutional claims. If you can prove you are innocent, then you can get into court. But the Nebraska courts have yet to adopt that standard in their state cases, meaning that here in Nebraska, the state courts value finality over fairness. It does not matter if someone says they are innocent. If you missed your procedural date, if you missed the time when you were supposed to raise it, they will not hear it now. Even if the reason that you missed that time was because you had ineffective assistance of counsel. Your attorney didn't do it in the first place. And because of the way they require you to raise those claims, folks who are innocent fail time and time again. And that is why International Wrongful Conviction Day is so important, and why we appreciate and value your support today and each and every day. The criminal legal system, like every legal system, is made by people. It is created and empowered by people. And that means it will be changed by people too. Together with you and your support, we will not only bring innocent people home, we will change the system to prevent that from happening in the first place. Throughout today's event, you can learn about the ways that you can make an impact for people like Antoine Young. And I want to thank you for attending. You can find more information on our work in the comment section and at the end of our program. Thank you so much. Together, we will right these wrongs.
While there is still much work to be done in Nebraska and each of the 5 states served by the Midwest Innocence Project, there is also work worth celebrating. Each year, the Nebraska Regional Advisory Council for the Midwest Innocence Project awards its Champion for the Innocent Award to someone who has demonstrated service and dedication to justice for those who have been wrongfully convicted. This year's recipient, Nebraska attorney Herb Friedman, has been an advocate for justice and instrumental in fighting for compensation for those who have been exonerated, including Darrell Parker, a Lincoln, Nebraska man who was wrongfully convicted in 1956 for the murder of his wife, and James Dean of the Beatrice Six, who was wrongfully convicted along with 5 others for the rape and murder of an elderly woman in Beatrice, Nebraska in 1985. While 5 of the Beatrice Six exonerees pled guilty under threat of the death penalty, one of them, Joseph White, always maintained his innocence. As we celebrate International Wrongful Conviction Day, it is important to honor Mr. White, who never gave up in the fight to prove his innocence and whose persistence eventually led to DNA testing that exonerated all 6 individuals. Unfortunately, like others who have been exonerated, including MIP clients Pete Coons and John Brown, Mr. White's freedom after incarceration was tragically cut short when he was killed in a workplace accident in 2011, just 2.5 years after being released from prison. It is only just to compensate exonerees who have lost years of their life in prison, and often so much more. This Wrongful Conviction Day, we ask you to support wrongfully convicted people and their families by urging passage of Representative Maxine Waters' Justice for Exonerees Act. While there is no amount of restitution that can make up for the damage caused by a wrongful conviction, the law will benefit exonerees in the federal system and also serve as a model to states as they contemplate new laws or changes to existing laws. We'll share a link where you can sign a petition urging the House and Senate Judiciary Committees to support the Justice for Exonerees Act. While official misconduct is frequently a factor in wrongful convictions, as was the case with both Mr. Parker and Mr. Dean, regardless of fault, states have a responsibility to help restore the lives of the wrongfully convicted and support their reentry into society. When state and local government officials were unwilling to do so in the cases of Darrell Parker and James Dean, Mr. Friedman spent years fighting on their behalf. We are honored to present this year's Champion for the Innocent Award to attorney Herb Friedman.
There are a lot of people who are unfortunately convicted of crimes that they didn't commit and are penalized for that. And our system should do something to cure that if they can. Somebody gets thrown in jail for something he didn't do, that's pretty much of a tragedy. And as a trial lawyer, as a plaintiff's lawyer, we are hired to right civil wrongs. That's a civil wrong. So I'm a fourth-generation Lincolnite. My great-grandfather came over here from Poland in the late 1870s, early 1880s, settled in Lincoln, and the family's been here ever since. When I was in high school, I took a course in business law, and that sort of tripped my trigger, and that's what started me on my road. Served 2 years in the Army as a Judge Advocate General's officer, and then returned to Lincoln in fall of 1962, it'll be 59 years ago, and I opened up my own office.
Herb has had a very long and very successful career, and he has helped a lot of people in a lot of different ways. We are just so grateful that he has chosen to take up this fight for the two clients that he did, and that he has been an ally to the Midwest Innocence Project and to wrongful convictions and innocence work in general.
Daryl was a graduate of the School of Forestry of Iowa State. He was just kind of an all-American boy, really. Came from a prosperous farm family, and comes home one day at noon and finds his wife dead. They squeezed a confession out of him after 11 hours. He recanted it the next morning. He didn't even know what happened to him. He was really dead there. That time it was too late. He'd signed a confession, and they said, "To hell with it. They're going to prosecute him anyway."
So I think it's interesting that both of the cases Herb was involved in were basically largely based on false confessions. They are one of the most common causes of wrongful conviction in the United States. I think they're actually the third most common cause. And yet people still have a really hard time wrapping their head around the idea that someone could ever confess to a crime they hadn't committed.
When I was a second-year student at the University of Nebraska, I was going to go to law school in my third year. They were trying that case, and I went down and I watched it as a young college sophomore. He served about 17 years, and then he was paroled. And then Nebraska passed a statute for wrongful conviction. In the Nebraska Statute that permits recovery of damages, you have to have a pardon. It's not just enough that your conviction was overturned. You have to be pardoned by the State Pardon Board. From that pardon, you can then file a lawsuit against the state to collect damages. There's a maximum of $500,000. And he contacted me, and we went from there.
These cases shed a light on that issue, which is much more prevalent than people think, as unfathomable as it seems. That's part of the value in what Herb is doing, in bringing attention to these issues as one of the main underlying causes of wrongful conviction.
Attorney General at that time held a press conference, and he said, we were wrong. We apologize for this on behalf of the people of the state of Nebraska. Unheard of. Rarely does that ever happen.
Now I can die in peace because I'll no longer have this burden of fighting this case.
So I learned about the Beatrice Six Case originally in 2006 when Herb Friedman came to the Law College to talk about the case as part of a panel on wrongful convictions.
Raping and murdering a 68-year-old woman in her apartment on the coldest night of the year in 1985, February. But we have no idea how they ended up in prison. These were 6 people who were just average, ordinary folks.
5 of the 6 individuals falsely confessed. That includes James Dean, who was Herb's client.
James had denied this. They had no idea why they'd arrested him. Out of a clear blue sky, 5 years after this thing happened. They tossed him in a jail cell. He was there for 22 days.
When they first arrested me, they were threatening me with an electric chair and all this stuff. And that was my only option, or at least I thought it was my only option.
Ultimately, the 6 individuals were all released from prison and exonerated in 2008 to 2009.
And there were like 16 judges that looked at that case, and all of them eventually thought that these people deserved to be compensated.
So in 2016, a jury awarded the Beatrice Six $28 million in a federal civil rights lawsuit that they had brought against Gage County, which is the county where they were convicted.
They're still paying the judgment. The county is still paying the judgment. So much every year. They had to raise the property taxes.
The money's not gonna bring back what I lost. It's just like a relief off my shoulders to know that everybody now knows that I wasn't guilty of this charge. It tells me that there's people out there that care about other people more than themselves, and that they're fighting to make sure that justice is served in the right way.
And it was interesting that when that happened to Daryl, he was 24 years old. When it happened to James Dean, he was 24 years old. They were both the same age. In the case of James, he was a high school dropout. And it took 22 days before they cracked him on that case. With Daryl was 11 hours. He was a college graduate. So it didn't make much difference what your education was or your background was. If they wanted to get a confession, they were going to get a confession. And that's kind of what they did.
Since that time, the case has been widely covered both locally and nationally. That's important because we should be hearing about these things and we should be talking about these things, because that will be one of the things that prevents it from happening again.
There was times that I said this case is never going to come down to trial or nothing, and I just pretty much gave up. Herb said, no, you can't give up. You have to keep fighting.
Well, I'm proud that we were able to succeed on his behalf. Made a difference in his life and the lives of the other people too.
I really give Herb a lot of credit, and the civil suit that they pursued on behalf of the Beatrice Six, a lot of credit in really thrusting this case back into the spotlight, which is where it should be.
Well, I'm very honored that the project did this. I was surprised and very honored, and it's probably one of the nicest things that's happened to me, I think.
We are so happy to have him doing that work in any capacity, and I hope that it does inspire other people to do what they can in whatever capacity they can, because there's a lot of ways that you can contribute in a meaningful way in the context of wrongful convictions.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Susan Taverdi, and I am a volunteer with the Midwest Innocence Project, and I am thrilled to introduce you to our live panelists here today, Ricky Kidd and Herb Friedman. I want to hop in and say I appreciate everybody who's been patient with us. We had some technical problems at the beginning of this program, streaming it live, but we appreciate you sticking with us. It's bound to happen in this world, and I think we've got it all ironed out now. So today we were joined by, of course, our honoree, Herb Friedman, who, as we saw through this incredible work, has been an advocate on behalf of those who are wrongfully convicted and so in seeking remuneration in civil litigation. And joining Herb is Ricky Kidd. Now, Ricky is a criminal justice reform advocate, and he was also a MIP client who was exonerated in 2018. So before we launch into our conversation, I want to turn to you, Ricky, and just have you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who decided to join us today for Champion of Innocence. Lunch and Learn. As Susan has mentioned, my name is Ricky Kidd. I was wrongfully convicted at the age of 21. And it took 23 years and 3 months for the Midwest Innocence Project, Professor Sean O'Brien, Cindy Dodge, many other great individuals to usher me home. Some of my issues we're going to talk about a little later, but these are issues that we must talk about because I'm not the only one who's deserving of their freedom.
Thank you, Ricky. And Herb, we heard a lot about you through the video, the award video, but I wanted to give you a chance if there's anything you wanted to add about your background. I know you have just a depth of experience in civil litigation and the law, and I wanted to give you a chance if you'd like to add anything more to what we've already learned about you today.
Well, I agree with Ricky, and I thank you very much for this wonderful honor. It's been my pleasure to receive this honor. It's been my pleasure to represent some really very nice people, Mr. Parker and Mr. Dean, in these very, very unfortunate cases that resulted in wrongful conviction of the two men who were completely innocent as a result of false confessions that were extracted from them. Fortunately, it's nothing that happens all the time, but it does happen. And I don't mean to imply that all law enforcement officers are evil and are bad apples, but the reality is that there are a few bad apples in every barrel, and I'm afraid that the same thing goes with law enforcement people. And as a result of that, there's some people who get thrown in jail, and I'm sure, unfortunately, some of them have been executed. So this is an opportunity to bring that to light and to do our best to see that it doesn't happen again.
Thank you. And Herb, I wanted to talk about your work in this area has been in civil litigation. And I wonder if you could tell the audience what laws in Nebraska and maybe even federally do the wrongfully convicted have to look to seek civil redress?
Each state is responsible for their own particular laws, of course. Nebraska is one of a handful of states that have actually passed laws that compensate people who have been wrongfully convicted. The Nebraska Statute, which is dealing with this issue, was passed in, I think, 2008 or 9 as a result of the Beatrice Six Case. And it was brought into the legislature, sponsored by Senator Lathrop. I'll give you just a little bit of background about that. It's a statute that says that if you're innocent, you have to prove that you're innocent. And if you've been given a pardon, then you're eligible to ask for damages. The limit on damages is $500,000, which in the case of Mr. White and in the case of Mr. Dean was certainly not enough to compensate them for what they went through. But that was the most the legislature was willing to do. They did not provide the payment of attorney's fees, which was requested in the original bill, but denied. The cases are tried before a district judge, no jury, and the weight of evidence is clear and convincing. And I'll explain a little bit about that. In a civil case, the weight of evidence that's required to prevail is something called preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not. In a criminal case, it's called beyond a reasonable doubt. You've heard that many times. In this case, it's called clear and convincing, which is someplace in between. And to decide where it is, it's up to the jury to decide. But it's certainly more than preponderance and less than beyond a reasonable doubt. On the federal side, it's a little different. There's an act, it's the Civil Rights Act, I think it's 1871, that was passed after the Civil War. I think it was the Grant administration. Sometimes it's called the Ku Klux Klan Act. Lawyers refer to it as the 1983 Act because it's Section 42 United States Code, Section 1983. That provides that a person who is been deprived of their constitutional rights may sue a person who is operating under the color of state law and the matter is resolved in a federal court in front of a jury. You can collect all kinds of damages, including attorney's fees.
So with a 1983 claim, you don't have the limit on damages that you're facing with the Nebraska statute, right?
There's a limit under the Nebraska statute. There is no limit under the 1983 Act.
And so with these cases, I mean, how long does the civil litigation take? I mean, in your experience with Parker and Dean, what kind of timeline and process are you looking at?
Well, with Mr. Parker's case, I think we worked on that case for pretty close to a year until the Attorney General of the state, Mr. Bruning, decided that this man was in fact innocent. He had been exonerated by the State Board of Pardons and been granted a pardon. And during the course of the investigation, they actually admitted that he was innocent. And at that point in time, I think Mr. Bruning decided that perhaps they should help this gentleman. And John Bruning actually called a press conference with Mr. Parker there and myself. And he apologized on behalf of the state of Nebraska for what happened to him. And he said, we're going to give you the full amount of the statutory damages. So that went relatively quick. The Beatrice Six case was in the opposite direction. We tried that case for a better part of a decade. There were 2 jury trials. We've been down to the 8th Circuit several times. And as a matter of fact, the Gage County is still paying off that judgment on a yearly basis. So it's that case came into our office in 2009. It's now 2021. So we've been on it for a long time.
And in the video we heard from James Dean, and he said, you know, there are moments where he felt frustrated and want to give up almost, and you helped, I guess, encourage him to keep up the fight. How do you do that? How do you help clients who might feel that there's no point anymore, that they've been fighting for so long that they should keep going?
I think Mr. James was very logical about this, and he pursued it. I don't think he ever really wanted to really give up. I think when he was talking there, he was talking about he kind of threw in the towel in the criminal case because nobody seemed to want to believe him. That was a terrible situation. You know, they had him in jail for 22 days, and they kept banging on his door and telling him he was guilty and threatening him with the death penalty. And finally, this deputy sheriff, who was also a PhD psychologist, told him that he repressed the memory and it'll come back to him in dreams, which was absolutely nonsense. But nevertheless, it happened. And as a result, James gave a false confession, as did Ms. Taylor and Ms. Sheldon. And it was the result of those false confessions that Joe White was falsely convicted.
Incredible.
For 4 hours.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. We've talked about this. Both Dean and Parker falsely confessed, but they came from fairly different backgrounds and different circumstances. So it kind of shows how false confessions can happen and under all sorts of circumstances.
That's absolutely correct. James came from a very average background, from a broken family. He dropped out of school in the 9th grade and always worked, and was an intelligent guy, but he didn't have the benefit of going to college. And I often thought that if he'd come from a different class in society in Beatrice, none of this would have ever happened. If this was a country club kid, they wouldn't have spent 10 minutes in jail for this kind of nonsense. Parker, on the other hand, came from a prosperous farm family. His parents had a couple of farms in Iowa. They were able to hire a very good lawyer. That still didn't work. He was convicted and spent 17 years in prison. Interestingly enough, he he handled his request for a pardon by himself.
Yeah. Incredible. Well, talking on the subject of false confessions, Ricky, I'd like to bring you into the conversation because we're talking
Sure.
about, you know, causes of wrongful convictions and false confessions. I mean, clearly with, of course, you know, the Dean and Parker case that led to the wrongful conviction. And now in your case, you didn't have a false confession, but you did incredibly, you were convicted well, perhaps I'll let you hop in there, but you were convicted despite having a very, you know, solid alibi and no physical evidence connecting you to the crime. So can you tell us about what in your case led to the wrongful conviction?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much again, Susan. Thank you, Herb, for your service for many years, helping individuals as myself, the Midwest Innocence Project, and everybody else. I just want to say thank you as we continue to learn. I'm fascinated and then some of this stuff I do know. I think I'm a little more fascinated today by the fact that others are joining the conversation and they get an opportunity to be educated and hopefully inspired. Speaking of some of those issues that surrounded my wrongful conviction, I suffered from a failed public defender system. I think those are one of the components that helped produce the environment for my wrongful conviction. Missouri is ranked number 49th as one of the worst public defender systems. And when I say worse, not that it's bad people over there, but they're severely underfunded. And so it creates a conundrum over there for them. One of the other things that contribute to my wrongful conviction is prosecutorial misconduct. I had a case of prosecutorial misconduct where the prosecutor withheld key evidence that would have pointed to actually committed the crime. Their office paid the state witness money. They withheld those from the records as well. So a lot of that came out. In addition to what contributed to my wrongful conviction and helped send me to prison was a suggestive identification procedure. It's called an illegal suggestive identification procedure where police officers show a photo array lineup to an individual, and then they keep showing, in my case, they kept showing the individual the same picture. Let me be a little bit more clear if I can. They actually showed this gentleman a single photo of myself first, and he says, no, that's not him. They then show him a 5-man photo spread, and there I am in the number 5 slot. He's kind of catching on to where they want him to go, but he says, I can't be sure. They say, fine, let's go watch this videotape lineup. They took him in another room where they had showed him a videotape lineup, and guess who was in the videotape lineup? Me. All the faces kept changing, but the same face kept appearing. It resulted in him picking the wrong individual. So those are some of the factors that contribute to wrongful convictions in America.
Incredible. And so through, I mean, you underwent a criminal prosecution, of course, and you're ultimately convicted of double homicide, double murder, and sentenced. Can you tell us about, you know, that day, what's going through your head?
Yeah, I was 21 years old. And while I wasn't making the best life choices, I was far from anything violent. I didn't grow up in a violent a gang environment or none of those different type of situations. So I was shocked. I was shocked by the accusation when detectives came to me and put those cold handcuffs on my wrist and told me I was being charged with double homicide. I was shocked because that just wasn't a part of who I was. That was not how I was brought up. I also thought it was a mistake that could be resolved. Once we went down to the police station, I thought that that's fact what they told me. They said, calm down, because I began to hyperventilate. I began to cry. They said, calm down. We're going to sort this out when we get down to the police station. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. I sat in the county jail for 11 months. I was appointed a public defender, as we mentioned. She failed me. The prosecutor's office failed me. A jury found me guilty and sentenced me at the age of 22 to 2 lives without the possibility of parole and 2 regular life sentences. My nightmare had just begun.
And I want to talk a little bit about, some of the evidence that I guess it seemed to me to be so obvious that would have prevented your conviction. Can you talk about the alibi evidence and the alibi you had, and I guess why, in your opinion, that didn't prevent your conviction?
Yeah. I really thought I was on solid footing. And I want the people listening today to really try to understand what I'm saying. I really thought I was on good footing, just like every American citizen. I had an alibi. I was at the Jackson County Sheriff's Department applying for a legal handgun permit. What other place could you be in? And so I'm thinking, y'all gonna go out there, y'all gonna see this, and this is about to be over. That was not the case. That was not the case. Although I told them where I was, although I told detectives where I was, they did not go out there to unpack that or investigate that at all. In addition to me telling the detectives that I was at the sheriff's department, I also gave them a full day account of where I was all day. I'm going to do you better. I'm not just going to show where I was at the time of the crime. I'm going to bring an array of witnesses on to show you where I was throughout the day. And I thought that would have been enough. It wasn't.
And so eventually, you served 21 years in prison?
23 years and 3 months.
And you're exonerated eventually and released, but that was a long fight to secure that exoneration. Can you tell me about the process to gaining your freedom?
It was a long fight. So I'm being ushered into this maximal level 5 prison where they house death row inmates. The first thing I wanted to do was get to a law library. When I heard that they had a law library where I can go work on my case, that's exactly what I began to do. I went to that library to work on my case. I began reaching out. I began reaching out to lawyers, to organizations, to churches, to anybody with media, to anybody who would listen. And I will send letters out by a pack of 100. I'll go buy 100 stamps and I'll send 100 letters out at a time. And then I'll do a follow-up 2 weeks later, another 100. I always didn't have money, so sometimes I would have to wait before I send my next wave out. In the process of sending that wave out, my letter landed on the desk of the Midwest Innocence Project, and they decided to look into my case. They decided to look into my case in 2005. By 2007, they decided to take my case. By 2009, we was back inside court, ready to prove that I indeed was innocent and that they made a mistake. The evidence was factual. It was overwhelming. In our opinion, it was very clear. But the Missouri Attorney General began niggling over technicalities of law. So instead of becoming exonerated in 2009, which I should, it took an additional 10 years because the state just would not come off the technicalities of law that they thought, irregardless to my innocence, I shouldn't have been released. It was a long fight. It was a long battle. Again, I lost 11 times before I finally won my very last appeal.
Incredible. I mean, I think of the exoneration process is so long, and we were talking about too with the civil litigation and the Beatrice Six Case took a very long time too. And we didn't touch on this, but I'm wondering, were there particular setbacks or moments where it just kind of kicked your process back in that civil litigation again to keep moving forward that were particularly frustrating or you think shouldn't have happened?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, when our cases were filed, All 6 of them were filed the same day. But it was interesting that the case of Mr. White was assigned to Judge Erbaum, who at that time was the chief judge of the district. And the other 5 cases were assigned to Judge Kupf, who was another judge in that district. Motions were filed motions for summary judgment based on qualified immunity were filed in all of those cases. And it was interesting, Judge Kupf overruled them. Judge Erbaum sustained ours. Judge, I should say, Judge, they were all sustained in the 5, but for Mr. White and Judge Kupf, he overruled their motion. And those motions then went up to the 8th Circuit, and the circuit sided with Judge Erbaum, was sent back for trial. And by that time, Judge Erbaum was pretty much retired. And so all the cases were then assigned to Judge Kupf. And we tried those cases twice. And what Ricky said about the improper treatment that he got, that's pretty much what happened with the people in the Beatrice Six. Our allegations for recovery was that number one, they did reckless investigation, and number 2, they manufactured false evidence, and the jury accepted both of those, and that's why the jury came in with what they did. It was a pretty quick decision. The first one was unfortunately was a mistrial. It was an 11-1 verdict, and it was a mistrial. That went down to the 8th Circuit, and they sent it back. And here we are.
Yeah. And Ricky, turning back to you, I mean, you lost so much of your life in prison, and you suffered such a grave injustice, and we're all here today because it's so unpalatable. But you went through that, and can you give us insight into, I mean, the losses you faced as a result of that time period, what you went through? And I mean, I watch you do such incredible stuff right now. You're such an amazing advocate, a voice out there, but you have some huge losses you faced through this injustice.
I have, Susan. First of all, thank you so much for that. It is important to me. I definitely have taken some losses. When we're talking about personal loss, we could start with my children. I had young children, and so I was snatched up out of their lives. I didn't get the opportunity to see them in preschool. I didn't get to see them in elementary school. I didn't get to see them graduated. One of my daughters graduated a year early. I missed all of that. I felt like I wasn't there to help rear them and protect them. That was that has been one of my biggest losses, but not my only. A lot of them run neck to neck. Another one that I tend to highlight and talk about is really my human potential, because context is I lost all my 20s. I got falsely accused at the age of 21. So all of my 20s, all of my 30s, and half of my 40s, I came home at the age of 45. And so where humans are maximizing their ability to be a productive individual, to make a living for themselves, to have a 401k, a family, a full life experience, all those years was taken from me. And so those are some huge losses that really stick out in my mind. The list really goes on, but those are the 2 that stick out the most.
Well, Ricky and I really appreciate you guys so much for joining us today. I know our time has already elapsed. We were already running up on time.
Yes.
But you've offered, I just love having the insight of a practitioner and, a client who's gone through that, to give the perspective of to both sides and who's involved in these cases. I really appreciate it again. And it was a pleasure to have you. And
yes,
Ricky, we're going to let you wrap up our session here today, and Herb and I are going to leave you. But again, thank you both so much.
Yeah, thank you. And so as Susan has said, or rather stated, thank you so much to everybody who decided to come and join us today for our 2021 Champion of Innocence Lunch and Learn. I hope you did take time during this lunchtime and learn a little bit more about our criminal legal system, some of the complexities and nuances that surround wrongful conviction. Every day I wake up as a free man now, since I've been home the past 2 years, and I'm thankful. I'm grateful that I'm home. And in that same breath, I'm also reminded daily of the men and women who are not home. All of those individuals across our country languishing inside prisons for crimes they did not commit. Our job here at the Midwest Innocence Project is to fight faithfully and vigorously until these men and women can come home. But we don't get to do that work without the help of people like you. Ordinary individuals who decide to do an extraordinary thing. And sometimes it's not the time that you have, but the dollars that you have. And so as we close out on the 2021 Champions of Innocence Lunch and Learn, we're gonna ask, would you be a champion with us? Will you join the cause with us and continue to help us bring other individuals home by making a donation today? If the answer is yes, you can go to the MIP.org, click donate, and get involved. I'm sure those men and women who are waiting for their turn, just like I was waiting for my turn, will appreciate your support. It takes great lawyers, it takes grit, it takes determination, it takes perseverance, but it also takes our supporters. We could not do this work without you, those who are interested also in helping see other innocent individuals come home. Please, again, if you haven't, please visit the MIP.org. You'll see on our main homepage where you can click donate and get involved. I want to say a special thank you once again to our sponsors who helped make this year's Lunch and Learn possible. The ACLU of Nebraska, we thank you. Berry Law Firm, we thank you. Baird Home Law Firm, we thank you. As well as the Nebraska College of Law. We thank you all so much for sponsoring this event, for helping others learn more as we spend time during this lunch hour. Until we see you again, everybody take care, stay safe, and remember, get involved if you can. Have a good day.